Hey guys, tonight, we're not talking about cozy dinners or a warm cup of tea. We're diving into medieval nights, so cold you'd gladly cuddle with anyone, even your enemy, as long as they're still warm. And if you think being hungry just means skipping dinner, welcome to the year 1316, where hunger could turn your friendly neighbor into a chef, specializing in two-legged protein. The peasants back then, those accidental survival champions, found ways to keep going, from huddling together like rats for warmth to chewing on anything that didn't bite back. Tonight's story will drag you into a world where survival often meant leaving your morals outside the door, or in the pot. Before we plunge headfirst into this black hole of history, if you enjoy stories that are painfully real yet sarcastic enough to make you laugh, hit like and subscribe only if you dare. And don't forget to drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there, so I know exactly who I'm talking to and who's still well fed. Now turn off the lights, ask yourself if you're sure that was beef you just ate, and get ready for a survival journey that might just make you grateful for instant noodles forever. Congratulations, you have just woken up, naked, freezing, starving, and welcome to the year 1316. The good news, you are still alive. The bad news, so are 3 rats, and one of them is chewing on your hair. You open your eyes inside a rickety wooden shack that looks like a recycled coffin. The roof is leaking. The walls are leaking. The floor is leaking, though you are not sure what exactly it is leaking. Your mattress is a pile of damp, moldy straw soaked with something warm and suspicious. You are wrapped in a wool blanket, stiff from years of grease sweat and insect corpses built up over countless winters. If that blanket crawled to the river and drowned itself, you would not be surprised. Too bad the river water is now more toxic than toilet cleaner, because this is 14th century Europe, and you have been reborn smack in the middle of the Great Famine, a brutal 3-year survival game where all the food disappears, but despair is plentiful. Outside, someone screams. Inside, someone groans. Both sound like their intestines are in open revolt. A child cries in the corner, or used to. It is quiet now. You try to stand. Big mistake. Your joints crack like a war drum. Your head spins like you just drank a bucket of moldy ale. Although again, there is no ale. There is nothing. Only the cold, the hunger, and that rat now looking at you like you are breakfast. You live in a shared hut with 6 other people and 2 goats, all soaked in the stench of despair, wet wool, rotting breath, open wounds, and spoiled turnips. The kind of smell that would make any god turn and run. People believe this is the wrath of God. Why? No one knows. Maybe the neighbor swore when he slipped. Maybe the widow dared to own 2 chickens. Clearly a witch. It is the year 1316, and Europe is not under attack by war or plague, not yet, but by weather. The rain has come like heaven sprung a leak. It has been pouring for years. Fields turned to swamps. Seeds rotted in the ground. Bread, the final comfort of the poor, has become a legend rarer than an honest priest or clean underwear. You no longer remember what wheat looks like. Maybe you see it only in dreams. Dreams where loaves of bread chase you. You stumble outside barefoot, slogging through mud thick as hell itself. The village path is lined with animal corpses, vacant eyes, and hollow stares. The cows no longer moo. The chickens no longer lay. Even the flies have stopped buzzing. Every creature is starving. and watching to see who gets weaker first. You pass an old woman boiling, a leather belt, stew of boiled hide, the apocalypse's signature dish. Last week, someone actually ate a shoe. Not a cartoon joke. A real meal wrestled from desperation and a dying sense of morality. People peel bark, grind weeds, cook clay. If it can be chewed, it can be eaten. Some swear they saw someone gnawing on a candle, and you believe them. You have considered it too. Amid all this misery, the church bell still rings. Prayer time. As if chanting could stop the rain or turn rocks into bread. The priest says this is a test of faith. Easy for him to say with salted meat under the altar and wine every Sunday. Meanwhile, you have started hallucinating flying loaves of bread. By noon, you still have not eaten. But you have swallowed a mouthful of mud, licked a rock for minerals, and stared at a dead crow far too long. That crow. Someone already marked it. You once saw two children fight over another one. It ended in blood. No one was surprised. One of them had no teeth, maybe from chewing bark. Still one. You drag yourself back to the hut where your uncle is sharpening a spoon against the wall. Says it is for digging roots. You are 80% sure he means the dog. You do not stop him. You no longer have the emotions to stop him. Famine does not just eat people. It devours morals, empathy, and whatever willpower you had left. Night falls. You curl up in your bug-infested blanket belly, screaming like a ghost drum calling other hungry souls. Someone next to you starts crying. You want to comfort them, but scared to waste the calories. Sleep will not come. Your body aches, but your soul aches more. You dream of food, but here dreams are just another form of torture. And that was only day one. What comes next is going to be much, much worse. The question is no longer, what is for breakfast? It is, how many people need to die before I get to eat something that used to be alive? Welcome to the famine. Welcome to 1316. Survival is optional. Sanity, not guaranteed. You are standing in the middle of the village, your feet sunk ankle deep in a sludge that is equal parts mud and manure. But forget the smell for a moment, because the real question right now is, why? Why are you eating moss porridge? Why is everyone in the village living like zombies? And why did the loaf of bread in last night's dream speak Latin? Do not worry. I will tell you, in classic, shatter your faith in the good old days, medieval fashion. It all started with rain. Sounds innocent, but do not be fooled. This was not the cute, romantic, Hollywood-style rain. This was doomsday rain. The kind of rain where even Noah would drown with the ark half built. It did not stop. It came down like the sky chugged 3 cans of Red Bull and held its bladder for 3 years. Starting in May of the year 1315, the heavens opened up like God slipped with a giant bucket. Wheat fields, now swimming pools, granaries moldier than the back of your underwear. The entire food production system turned into a swampy mess. That summer, instead of harvesting wheat, villagers harvested poisonous mushrooms. Instead of threshing grain, they swatted mosquitoes. Instead of planting seeds, they planted hope, then watched it drown in puddles. Floods washed away bridges, drowned horses, carried off livestock, and anyone brave enough to eat fish Good luck with the parasites now living in your gut. But that was only chapter 1 of the book titled How to Destroy an Entire Continent. Chapter 2. No Food Reserves. Why? Because medieval Europe had no refrigerators, no canned food, and the idea of planning ahead only applied if you were a bishop living in a stone fortress the size of a shopping mall. You lived on faith and turnips, both of which spoil quickly when it rains too much. The air grew thin with the smell of bread and thick with rumors of human meat. You heard the old folks whisper, "In the old days, we had wild potatoes. Now even the dirt's out of grit." People dug, clawed at roots, sifted mud for anything that could fool a stomach for 20 minutes. Some chewed stones to feel full. Some chewed other people. But we will get to that later. For now, everything was still officially a crop failure crisis. But what really turned this hunger into a full-blown continental disaster was feudalism, which is just a fancy way of saying they live on a mountain of gold you die in a ditch. Every patch of farmland belonged to someone powerful, a noble, a lord, or the church, and you were merely allowed to grow food there, for them. That means the wheat you planted, not for you. It was for taxes, tithes, and tribute to those velvet-robed elites sipping wine in their castles while reading scripture, backwards. When the harvests failed, instead of showing mercy like decent humans, the nobles raised taxes. Why? Because God helps those who sacrifice. And in this case, sacrifice meant you die. They live. Some were hanged for stealing a single onion. Some had their hands chopped off for picking wild herbs from the Lord's sacred forest. That is right. Even weeds had owners. Good luck surviving without breaking the law. This famine was not just about food. It was the total collapse of trust in every system. Villagers eyed each other like future enemies, while priests stood on pulpits blaming sin for the rain. You wanted to vomit, but there was nothing in your belly to bring up. Worse yet, animals began to die. Chickens toppled over. Cows dropped. Pigs ended it all by wallowing in poisoned mud. Milk vanished. Meat only appeared when someone died unexpectedly and had no relatives. Some claimed the cow fell and broke its neck, though everyone saw the slash mark behind its ears. Even the cities were no better. Major hubs like Paris, London, Cologne, bursting with starving refugees. The smell of waste, of death, of despair. Crime soared. Food prices skyrocketed 10-fold, then 20-fold. A loaf of black bread could buy you a child. The government flailed the church, prayed, and you began to see a new kind of death. Death by hesitation. Those who did not flee the village in time were swept away by floods. Those who refused to steal herbs starved. Those who believed in justice died first. And you are starting to realize that surviving this famine is not about being good. It is about playing a brutal moral game. Every choice comes with a price, and more often than not, that price is blood. By the end of the day, when you look up at the sky, you will whisper the same question that millions once asked. Voice trembling, eyes dry. Why does the sky hate us so much? No one answers. Only the rain, and the growl of your stomach like a drumbeat for the dead. If you think you have ever eaten something questionable, like a slice of pizza dropped on the floor for 3 seconds or instant noodles a month past expiration, then you might want to sit down. Or better yet, lie down. Preferably with an empty stomach, because what is about to enter your gut is enough to make your digestive system call a lawyer. In the year 1316, the very idea of food was rewritten. Every definition you knew, protein, vitamins, flavor, was tossed into the pigsty and stomped flat by a starving cow. In this era, food did not need to taste good or be clean or even be technically edible. It just needed to stop moving, or at the very least, not move too much. A typical breakfast, a bowl of pottage, and do not picture anything fancy. This was a brownish-gray mystery slop made with rainwater, weeds, rotting roots, and whatever could be scooped from a flooded field. Its texture was somewhere between mud and despair, and its flavor was best described as boiled heartbreak. To go with it, say hello to bark bread, just like it sounds. It was made from ground-up tree bark mixed with moldy bran and a little white clay, then lightly baked until crispy. You did not eat it. You battled it. By the time you finished, your teeth were chipped, your guts twisted, and your soul lightly damaged. Some folks got more creative. They boiled leather shoes. Yes, shoes. The very thing that once protected your feet from cow dung now became a prized source of protein. And do not ask where the shoes came from. Just chew and hope it was not someone's final belonging. Moss was salad. Scraped from stone walls, rinsed in dirty water, seasoned with salt if you had any, or sweat, which you always had. In some places, moss was stuffed into dumplings and called heaven's gift, which made sense, because eating it gave you rashes, hives, and a fast track to questioning your dignity. But the crown jewel of medieval culinary innovation, dirt porridge. People dug up soil from fields, sifted out the rocks, sun-dried it, and boiled it with water. Some added fireplace ash for extra minerals, though no one knew which minerals exactly. Some died after eating it. Some did not. And in those days, surviving a meal counted as a win. The problem is, the human body was not built to digest rocks, bark, and bird droppings. Constipation, diarrhea, and vomiting often came at the same time, creating what some called the internal cyclone. Your vision blurred, your skin turned pale, your teeth loosened like your morals in a famine. And worst of all, you were still hungry. And when hunger crossed a certain threshold, it did not just devour your stomach. It ate your ethics. Some began sneaking into cemeteries, not to mourn, not to remember, but to dig. Human corpses, if not too decomposed, became the main course in more than a few family dinners. People whispered in the dark, "Just boil it long enough." Children began disappearing, at first from disease, then from the neighbor's kitchen, and no one asked questions, because asking meant you were not hungry, and if you were not hungry, you became a target. People started hiding their fullness like modern folks hide their savings. No sharing, no hinting. Every meal became a state secret. Some priests began preaching, "This is a test from the Lord." Villagers replied with hollow eyes and stomachs growling like cursed wolves. If God was testing them, he was playing a cruel game. Prayer did not bring bread. But if you prayed long enough, you might die in a graceful pose, which in a way was a blessing. In some regions, new dishes were invented, made from creatures no one thought edible: rats, cats, dogs, pigeons, lizards, bats. Anything that could be caught could be cooked. Black markets bloomed. A fat rat's head could buy you a coat. A plump cat was worth as much as a young calf. You saw your neighbor gnawing on a bat wing and felt jealous. That was the new normal. And you were sitting in front of a bowl of mixed moss stew sprinkled with a dash of lime powder to cut the bitterness. And you were starting to wonder, would I ever eat human flesh? Or at least, lick a suspicious bone. No one ever taught you how to stay human in a famine. No school ever made you choose between bread and morality. But the Middle Ages did, and it taught with a punch straight to the gut. You eat, you vomit, you eat again, because survival is not about living well. Survival means not dying before everyone else. You wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of clinking in the kitchen. Not rats, not wind, but a knife being sharpened against stone. And in the blood-tinged moonlight shining through the leaky thatched roof, you see it. Your neighbor is stripping flesh from a human arm. This is not your imagination. This is not a sick joke. This is Europe during the Great Famine, where moral boundaries have been slow cooked in a stew of despair. And human meat has started appearing on the menu. Not because anyone wanted it, but because there was nothing else left to eat. And if you are thinking I would never do that, try going 7 days without food first. Then we will talk. It starts with eating the dead. The first ones to starve are not buried, because burial is wasteful. You do not throw away calories. You use them. And use begins by boiling thoroughly, adding some fireplace ash to mask the smell, and hoping no one in the village recognizes the tattoo on the ribs. Some places even developed community rules: whoever dies first feeds the living. A kind of medieval organ donation. Some even gave it a name: cold blood communion. But then, the dead are not enough. And that is when survival turns into actual hell. There are records from Flanders that recount a mother killed her child, cooked it, and shared it with neighbors. No one declined. In one family in Poland, they discovered the father had not gone missing on a hunting trip. He was in the basement being smoked like pork by his wife and children. Their explanation: he was already skinny, so the meat was a bit tough. This was no longer rumor. History recorded it. Courts recorded it. Human bones in cooking pots recorded it. Medieval manuscripts state plainly, et comiderunt carnem humanum. They ate human flesh, and not in panic, but as a process. You begin to understand why every glance in the village now feels like a silent appraisal. That one's too skinny, not worth the effort. She probably has more fat but getting old. People assess each other like talking livestock. And if you are not fast enough, strong enough, or too plump, you disappear. Quietly, cleanly, and with a hint of rosemary on the grill. The story of the meat pie in Paris 1317 spreads like wildfire. A bakery in the slums was caught mixing human flesh into their dough. When arrested, the owner simply said, "We were only serving what customers wanted." The more terrifying part: the place was packed. You no longer know who to trust. Even your grandmother, the one who once rocked you to sleep with fairy tales, is now hiding a cleaver under her pillow. and in her eyes, you are no longer her grandchild. You are a breathing calorie reserve. Your conscience starts to rot. You think about it every day. Not whether eating human flesh is wrong, but why it suddenly makes so much sense. You are starving. You are shaking. And you are staring at a corpse in the village. No family. No one watching. It lies there, like an invitation. You step closer, one hand trembling with a knife, the other placed over your chest to check if your heart is still there. And then you stop, not out of morality, but because someone else already took the thigh. Welcome to the darkest chapter of history, when humans stopped being human. When religion, law, and family were all stewed in an earthen pot over the slow fire of survival instinct. And you, someone who once cried from slicing your finger peeling apples, are now sitting beside a corpse thinking about bone broth recipes. The question is not if you can eat your neighbor. The question is when you will. There is one thing people rarely mention about famine. It does not kill you quickly. It gnaws slowly, not just at your stomach, but at your morality. Hunger is hunger, but long enough it turns good people into quiet chewers of broken promises. Compassion, sold off for a chunk of bread hard as brick. Dignity, thrown into the fire to keep warm. You start to understand this clearly the night you hear screaming, a child beaten to death for stealing a turnip, not punished, killed, because that turnip was meant to feed 3 people. 1 lived, 2 did not forgive. Whoever said morality is priceless clearly has never been starving. In the village now there are no good people or bad people. Only those who eat and those who get eaten. Those who steal quickly and those who were just a little too slow. Communal life has become a silent competition in theft. Who can slip into the priest's granary unnoticed? Who can crack the lock on the well after prayer? Everyone is moral, until their stomach growls. And the law still exists. Written on expensive parchment, read aloud by men who have never known hunger. An old woman was executed for hiding a loaf of bread under her dress. The sentence public hanging in the market square. An example. An example for whom? For those who ate that bread to survive one more day. Justice back then was not meant to keep order. It was meant to maintain fear. You step into church hoping for some peace. Big mistake. The priest is preaching about the purity of the soul while the person beside you is secretly licking candle wax. Outside, God sends rain. Inside, people send their sins. No one comes to confess. They come to watch, to see who bows their head first and what is in their pockets. Prayer does not bring bread, but it does waste time. Time you could have used to guard your food. In some places, churches started charging admission. Those who had nothing to offer were asked to starve in holiness outside. Starving to death on the steps of a cathedral became a common sight. And the priest, belly round as a barrel, gave sermons about the sacrifice of Christ. Inside the home, morality rotted faster than potatoes. Brothers fought over a bowl of gruel. Husbands hid food from wives pretending to be hungry to keep their pride. Children were no longer called my love, but who ate my portion. Trust drained away. Family ties marinated in suspicion. And dinner, if there was dinner, became a psychological battlefield full of tears and threats made with wooden spoons. Some started faking madness just to avoid being blamed for stealing food. Others blamed demons for meat that vanished. Some accused neighbors of witchcraft just to seize their property. You misheard number accusation was a survival tactic. Morality does not shield you from starvation, but a well-timed lie might keep you alive. You find yourself becoming numb. Crying children no longer move you. A man collapsing in the street, you step over him. Compassion becomes a burden. Every person you save is another mouth competing with you. And in your mind, that voice grows louder. If I help them, who helps me? This famine is not just killing bodies. It is killing the humanity inside humans. You look into the mirror, if you have enough strength to look, and see a face that believes in nothing but survival. No more faith in justice or kindness, or even yourself. And strangely, that starts to feel normal. You once believed being human meant keeping your dignity. Now being human means knowing what you must do not to die. Whether that means stealing, lying, betraying, or worse. As long as you are still breathing, you have eaten moss. You have chewed on boiled leather. You have looked at the old lady next door and seen a breathing lump of protein. But today, you have officially reached the bottom of the food chain when you decide to leave the village behind and live in the forest like a half-human creature. Not to find yourself. No one in the year 1316 is out here doing a spiritual detox. You leave for one reason. Staying means dying. The village is now hell with a thatched roof. Every stare is a threat. Every stomach growl is a death sentence. Leaving is not running away. It is the last rational act of survival. You join a group of outcasts, tax dodgers, widows exiled from their villages, landless farmers, and one old man who is frighteningly good at finding mushrooms, though you suspect half of those mushrooms once spoke. They do not call it a community. That word sounds too civilized. This is a pack. No one brings a Bible. No one preaches. The only rule: eat to live or get out of the way. You are handed a dull dagger, a torn net bag, and a single piece of advice. If it has strange fur, spit it out immediately. Yes, you now live among people who will eat anything with a heartbeat, or the memory of one. Your diet consists of anything in the forest that does not wiggle too much. Snails, tree roots, wild rats, soggy beehives, crippled birds, bugs that make unsettling noises, and the occasional dead animal, assuming another group has not already gotten to it. The specialty 3-day stew, cooked with whatever you can scavenge, simmered until the color changes and the smell becomes untraceable. Your first night you sleep on damp moss, clutching your dagger, eyes wide open. This is not the peaceful forest from fairy tales. This is a place where someone might slit your throat over a moldy crust of bread. The good news: no one wakes you up to ask permission. Morning begins with rummaging through other people's bags while they sleep. Then it is time to hunt, which means digging through trash in abandoned villages or intimidating surviving farmers with eye contact. Sometimes the group ambushes tax collectors, steals their dry rations, and disappears into the forest like starving goblins. No one calls it crime. Crime is something you care about when you still have 3 meals a day. The children, if there are any, do not play. They are taught how to spot fresh corpses, how to start fires with dried manure, how to mimic a wolf's howl to scare off lone travelers. This is not childhood. This is emergency survival boot camp for tiny humans. And if a kid fails to learn fast enough, they disappear. No one asks. No one cries. You start to feel yourself changing. Not growing up, but breaking down. You walk hunched like a wolf. You sleep gripping your knife. You identify spoiled meat by smell and by intestinal memory. You no longer flinch at the sight of a corpse. On the contrary, you see it as an opportunity. One day, your group blocks the path of a migrating family. They have nothing but 2 sacks of cloth and a crying baby. No one speaks. Blades come out. The father begs, but all you hear is your stomach, a single slash, a deep sigh, and then the meat is shared like a holy offering. You do not feel guilty. You just feel full. And the fullness is so rare, so overwhelming, you begin to cry while chewing. When did you become this thing no one knows? No one remembers. Because here the past is useless if you cannot eat it. Only the present matters, full of mud blood and meat-flecked bones. You are no longer a farmer, no longer a believer, no longer mother's sweet little child. You are a beast who wears a blade, a beast who can smile, a beast who will eat its own kind, if necessary. And the scariest part, you are starting to feel proud of surviving. One day you wake up not because a rat is chewing your foot, or someone is pulling a dagger to steal your last crumb of bread, but because your stomach is performing a live death metal concert. A full symphony of cramps, nausea, dizziness, diarrhea, and one big question. Am I dying? Good news. You are not dead. Bad news. You are about to be. And just to make it extra dramatic, you are living in an era where the word medicine roughly translates to, you are lucky if your doctor does not kill you first. This is the Middle Ages, where the human body was treated like a leather sack meant to be poked, cut, or burned just to see what happens. First comes the diagnosis. There are no tests, no stethoscope, no doctor with glasses saying, interesting. Instead, the village healer looks at your skin tone, listens to your groans, then mutters, your 4 humors are out of balance. The 4 humors, blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And if something is wrong, the solution is to poke a hole and let it drain. Congratulations. You are about to be bled. The most beloved medical treatment of the era. Headache bleed. Diarrhea bleed. Already bleeding bleed some more. Usually with a dull knife or a suction cup or a leech, the kind of leech that is just as hungry as you are. Pain relief. No anesthesia. Pain is part of the soul cleansing process. If you faint, perfect. At least you will not see your blood being collected into a wooden bowl, while the healer dips a finger in and tastes it like some twisted medieval Michelin chef. If you are injured, say stabbed during a fight over a chicken bone or impaled on a sharp stick in the woods, then you are in for a treat, medieval surgery. Performed by whom? A barber. Yes. The same guy who shaved your head yesterday is now slicing your leg open with the same razor. He cuts. He hums. No numbing. If you survive, it is a miracle. If you die, it is God's plan. Infection. Of course. No one cares about washing hands. Feces-covered fingers, blood-crusted blades, dirty rags reused 10 times. You might not die of hunger, but a wound the size of a coin can be your one-way ticket to hell. Days later, you are feverish, blurry-eyed. You can smell your own rot. People avoid you like they avoid tax collectors. No one wants to catch the curse of decay. The healer returns, this time with a pouch of medicine. Inside, dried scorpions, sun-baked goat droppings, suspicious roots, and powdered human ash. They burn herbs mixed with sulfur around you. Some places even give you goat urine from a 3-day-old kid to drink. If you vomit, great. The toxins are escaping. If you die, your soul is free. Real medicine. Forget it. Antibiotics have not been invented. Vaccines do not exist. Anyone who dares to suggest that disease might come from invisible organisms gets burned at the stake for claiming God is not the cause. That is heresy. And heresy does not need a doctor, just dry wood. In wandering camps, illness is as common as dirt. And yes, that is literal because every fever means others start timing your death to claim your stuff. No one takes care of the sick. They just wait for it to get cold enough to drag your body away without getting bit. Someone has pneumonia, wheezing like a broken blacksmith's bellows. Someone else goes blind from eating the wrong mushroom. Another is covered in sores, oozing pus from the ears, and still has to scavenge potatoes because if you do not work, you starve. Here, sickness is not as terrifying as the fact that no one cares. You might die from diarrhea, or from someone thinking you are about to die and smashing your head to steal your coat. Death does not arrive gently. It comes with groans, with screams, and often with the wet chewing sounds of people standing nearby already waiting. And then, when you are too weak to move, lying in a corner swarmed with flies, someone touches your forehead and says, "If you live, get up tomorrow and go pick wild greens. If you die, they will not cry, they will chop, and they will cook." Welcome to medieval healthcare, where treatment means bloodletting diagnosis is superstition, and the ending is always the same silence. You have chewed on bark. You have drunk water used to wash corpses. You have watched others skinned like overripe tomatoes. And after all of that, you are still alive, or at least not fully dead yet. So what is left for you to hold on to faith? Yes, when everything else rots, morals, flesh, community, intestines, people tend to return to God. Except in the Middle Ages, God is not the warm, gentle figure holding your hand through the storm. God here is the kind of deity who watches you starve and says, "I am testing you." In the morning, the church bells still ring. Even as people outside claw at each other over a fish head, the bells toll steadily, not to inspire hope, but to awaken fear. Not fear of death, fear of skipping Mass. Missing just one service could be a sin. And in this era, sin is not measured in harsh words. It is measured in lashes and chains and being thrown into a well with a stone tied to your feet to cleanse the soul. You drag your swollen body, spinning head and hollow stomach to the church. It still glows with candlelight, still hums with Latin chants, a language you do not understand but must whisper amen to like a God-fearing parrot. The priest stands on the pulpit, his robes billowing like a famine-era superhero, proclaiming, "This is a test of faith. Those who endure shall be rewarded." You look up, lips cracked, throat dry as a brush fire, and whisper, reward where no reply. God leaves you on red. Some pray until their knees bleed. Some confess for hours, sobbing, whipping themselves like pain is proof of devotion. Some fast, not out of holiness, but because they have nothing to eat, then get called living saints. You watch them and wonder whether to respect them, or suggest they seek help. The church says, give offerings, and you, a person without even a pair of shoes, are told to bring grain for the harvest feast. Grain from where no one knows. Just bring something or be branded godless. Some bring their hair. Some bring a dead cat. One man brings a finger claiming it belonged to someone who did not believe in God. The priest calls it a powerful symbol, so powerful that others start chopping off their own fingers as offerings. You begin to doubt. But doubt is a sin, suggesting that God could be wrong heresy, asking why children die while the priest gains weight. Treason. And treason in the Middle Ages means being hung upside down in the chapel and burned like kindling. Anyone still want to ask questions? And yet, even under threat, many still beg for miracles. Some villages organize repentance parades, people whipping themselves bloody, walking in circles, pleading for the rain to stop, for the fields to dry, for bread to fall from the sky. Others host public exorcisms. They pick the weakest villager, tie them to a post, and scream at them until they die, to banish the spirit of famine. When they die, they are buried near the church. A little bonus. But no miracle comes. The rain keeps falling. The fields keep rotting. People keep shrinking into skeletons trying to cosplay as humans. So the people change strategies. They look for sacrifices. That strange neighbor sacrifice. The red-haired woman. Sacrifice. The child who talks in their sleep. Slit their throat. You watch the village gather to burn a witch, accused because she knew how to treat diarrhea with eucalyptus bark. Ironically, more effective than anything the church ever tried. The flames rise, people scream, and the priest announces, purity has been restored. Then he retreats to his room and eats a roast chicken. You sip rainwater mixed with mold. You begin to realize faith will not save you, but lacking faith might kill you. Belief is something you carry not to be saved, but to be left alone. No faith. You are a criminal. Too much faith. You are a target. Balancing the two. Harder than finding a sproutless potato in a plague house. At the end of the day, you kneel once more. Look up at the statue of Christ and whisper, if this is a test, I am turning in a blank sheet. There is no reply. Only the wind howling through the torn church roof. And your stomach, still hungry. 3 years. 3 winters cold enough to crack bone. 3 summers hot enough to boil your thoughts. And a checklist of things you once swore you would never do, now fully ticked off. Eat moss. Done. Chew leather. Easy. Steal potatoes from a blind man. Yes. Consider tasting a toe. No confirmation, no denial. But you are still alive. And in a medieval famine, that alone is a miracle. The rain finally stops. The ground begins to dry. People rejoice as if God just handed them a wheat voucher. Whatever seeds remain are planted. Fields are cleared. Manure is spread. And there is plenty of that, no worries. Those still upright begin digging, tilling, seeding, as if death was just a 3-year-long joke. You plant too. Not because you believe the harvest will be good, but because you have no other choice. Believe it or not, your hands still must dig, sow weed, chase off rats, and pray that those baby roots do not sprout legs and run. The village starts to echo with laughter, brief, crooked, and sour at the edges. Some families rebuild their roofs. Some survivors begin pretending they never ate human flesh. That it is all behind us now. That we must look to the future. As if morality were a coat you could take off, wash clean, and wear again once the weather improved. You sit there watching people garden, build pens, sing, and you feel nothing, not because you are numb, but because your feelings were eaten alive sometime last winter. You cannot laugh, you cannot trust, and when you look at the hot bowl of soup in front of you, you do not feel comfort. You feel suspicion. You remember those who died, not from hunger, but from being killed by the hungry. You remember the screams, the pleading, the hollow eyes that closed one last time. You remember the moment you held the knife, not to defend yourself, but to take the last piece of food. You remember staying silent when your friend was cast out of the group, just because he limped and consumed more than he contributed. You remember not doing anything. And now, as the others celebrate survival, you start to ask yourself, am I still human? Someone says, we are strong because we endured. But you know that is a sweet lie, because what you left behind was not just bodies, but the last fragile piece of your own humanity, the part that knew how to flinch, how to refuse violence, how to stop before becoming a monster. You survived. But in exchange, you gained nightmares. You no longer feel hunger only in your stomach. You feel it even while eating, because now the hunger lives in your trust. Trust that the world will heal, that you will heal, and trust is rarer than salt. People say the children born after the famine will live better lives, that they will grow, learn, and never taste the filth you endured. But you look at those children, born in huts where their mothers once ate gruel mixed with dirt, and you know one rainy season is all it takes for everything to return. And when that happens, will they survive? Probably. Will they still be human afterward? Hard to say. You look at your own hands, hands that held knives, clawed through soil, gripped the dying, and then let go. They tremble slightly, not from cold, not from hunger, but from the simple, unfamiliar weight of still being alive. If there is a miracle in this dark age, it is that you are still here, able to read these words, because the famine did not kill you, not completely, but it carved something into your bones, into your brain, into your reflection. Every morning I survived. But I am not the same, and that is the price of survival. A price no one ever taught you how to pay, until you lived long enough to remember it. There is a strange moment in Napoleon's life that no one recorded. No history book mentions, but you can imagine it. A late afternoon in Paris, pale light filtering through the curtains, and he stands alone in front of a mirror and realizes he is really short. Not just shorter than the guards, not just shorter than the kings he plans to overthrow, but shorter even than the world's expectations of someone determined to conquer it. In that fleeting instant, if it had been someone else, they probably would have lowered their head. But Napoleon, he laughed. Not a proud laugh, not a mocking laugh, but the kind of laugh at someone who has just grasped something deeply dangerous. Other people's contempt is his first secret weapon. Napoleon was not tall, and he knew that ever since he was a boy teased on the island of Corsica. But he did not try to be taller. He just needed to stand in exactly the right place, to make all those taller than him have to look down to see him. In a world where people believed in bloodlines, height, nobility, and divine glory, Napoleon believed in only one thing positioning the chessboard. He was not born an emperor, nor chosen by God. He was just a thin, solitary child, book-obsessed and angry. But within that anger, something quietly grew, a strategic mindset, not to defeat someone, but to understand someone who thinks they are winning. They say in the army he was always the one who went to bed the latest and rose earlier than any guard. Not because he was hard-working, but because he was obsessed with the moment everything changes. And that moment often comes when people are off guard. When Napoleon was young, Europe was a puppet stage. Kings and princes danced by protocol, redrawing borders like children playing with Lego, and believed in inherited power, not choice. In that game, a short officer stood silent, observing. He did not ask for a part. He rewrote the script. People often say his height was 5'2", but they forget he lived in the French system, which means in fact roughly 5'6", quite average at the time. It is just that he was portrayed as smaller by his enemies in England as a way of mocking posterity. Strangely, that very mockery made him immortal, because he ceased being a person. He became a symbol, the short man who reached things no taller person dared dream of. In that mirrored moment, he did not just see himself. He saw all the looks from above, all the doubtful eyes, all the little humiliations piled up in a lifetime. And he swore to himself he would not let history write his name as a footnote. He would do what nobody had done before, design history according to the vision of the scorned. And indeed, just a few years later, he made all of Europe tremble at his moves, not by height, but by vision. He did not wield the sword first. He wielded the map. He did not shout orders. He drew the front lines with 2 fingers as though writing a musical score. And in each battle, he never fought to win a single engagement. He fought to change the way people think about victory. There is a quote attributed to him sounding like jest, but actually a strategic truth. Height does not matter unless you are stairs. For Napoleon, precisely because he was not tall, he never had a restricted perspective. No one expected him to be great. No one was wary when he approached. And that is how he won, by turning his opponent's contempt into his advantage. Perhaps that is why he rarely stood still for long. Portraits showing him riding a horse, crossing snow, standing on a hilltop, not merely beautiful images. But a confirmation height may lose, but stance does not. And he himself placed the crown on his head, telling the world, "I need no blessing. I am destiny myself." Yet amid all those triumphs, there remains one question quietly buried in his gaze. Did he ever wonder if he had been born taller? Would he have seen as far? If you have ever played chess, you will understand this. The board does not need good people. It needs people who can see the next move. even before the peace knows it is going to be sacrificed. Napoleon understood that from a very early age. To most people, war is chaos. But to him, war was living geometry. When others saw cannon fire, he saw trajectory. When they heard cheering, he heard the rhythm of morale. And while they were still drawing maps after dinner, he had already sealed the victory the night before by seeing the battlefield like an unfinished symphony. There was a time he told his men, "I do not fight their armies. I fight the way they think." And that was the most dangerous tactic of all, striking perception itself. A good man walks into war with morals. Napoleon marched in with logic, and his logic did not come from military school. It came from relentless observation of people. He saw that the weakest part of an empire was never the fortress. It was the fake trust between generals. He was not a born genius. He was a product of obsession, so obsessed that before each battle, he would mentally rehearse it like a multi-act play. In his mind, soldiers were not pawns, they were currents. Terrain was not an obstacle, it was an opportunity. And time was not a clock, it was something you could deceive. At the Battle of Austerlitz, he deliberately made both Austria and Russia believe he was retreating. They charged forward, thinking they had the upper hand, and that was when he snapped the trap shut. A move that looked like surrender turned out to be a masterstroke, like handing over a queen only to take the whole board. There was something uncanny about his tactics. He always made decisions so quickly that others thought he was reckless, but the truth was the opposite. Napoleon was a master of probability. He never made a move without seeing at least 3 exits and 2 counters. He just calculated faster than those who even knew they were being calculated. And the most dangerous thing, he did not love victory, he was addicted to it. Addicted to the look on an opponent's face when they could not figure out, how did he know we were going to do that? Addicted to that moment when his soldiers cheered his name not out of obedience, but because they believed. Napoleon understood, an army is not just a weapon, it is belief armed. Each soldier was a fear he had trained into a blade, and every victory was a message. It is not about who wins, but about who understands the rules better. In war councils, he rarely shouted. He asked. He asked endlessly. What if it rains? What if the enemy has reinforcements? What if we lose? That last question always made his subordinates shiver. Not because he feared losing, but because they knew. He had never lost without turning that loss into an advantage. Napoleon once said, "I am never surrounded, I just change the direction of my attack." And that was true. Even when cornered, he never let emotions decide. No move made out of pride. No attack launched out of anger. If he had to retreat, he retreated like a man, laying a trap. That made him terrifying not just to enemies, but to allies too. People could not believe someone could be that cold. But for him, emotion was a luxury you could not afford on a chessboard. Kindness was losing. One move early. And sometimes he was willing to sacrifice even those who had marched beside him if it meant shortening the path by a single step. There is a rumor, no one knows if it is true, that during one campaign, he ordered hundreds of wounded men to be left behind just to move faster. When someone protested, he simply said, "I am saving the rest." That sentence sounds like a bloodless equation, But to Napoleon, the board had no place for half measures of emotion, only results. And in his world, efficiency was the highest form of ethics. One historian once wrote, "Napoleon did not fight with troops. He fought with the ability to not blink when it was time to cut off an arm to save the body." And that is why, in a world of aristocrats, rituals, and clueless monarchs, he, a short man who refused to turn war into religion, became the very face of modern warfare. He did not become emperor to rule. He became emperor to prove the world is not run by the strongest. It is run by the one who can calculate the moves of every strong man on the board. And the final twist, Napoleon did not play chess to win. He played to rebuild the board with his own rules. Some people are born wearing a crown. Some are born to wear a crown. And then there is Napoleon. No one handed him power. There was no prophecy, no guiding star, just a Corsican boy speaking French with a thick accent out of place in elite academies and with eyes that had never learned to look down. Napoleon once said, "I am a product of circumstances." But I chose to remake those circumstances. When he joined the military, no one noticed. When he commanded the artillery, no one believed. When he was given troops, people were surprised. And when he started winning, they started to fear. But here is the curious part: even in victory, he was never seen as worthy. No royal bloodline, no family tree filled with kings, no Bourbon or Habsburg name. Even among the French aristocracy, he was still a provincial and officer who climbed his way up through the chaos. And perhaps because of that, he did not rule like a king. He ruled like a man rebuilding the throne from ashes. Napoleon did not inherit the throne, he designed it. Carefully, methodically, like mapping out a new military strategy, a political maneuver. And it all began with the simplest weapon the crowd's pretend belief. He understood one thing clearly: people do not need a real king. They need a symbol that looks like it was chosen by fate. So he began constructing himself. But not the way Hollywood would do it. He did it like a mathematician, every small detail feeding a larger strategy. He revived rituals, but in his own style. He restored the church's status, but only as a tool to legitimize his power. He posed in paintings like Caesar, but moved like an old soldier, both classical and familiar, both majestic and ordinary. And then came the climax of the entire performance, the coronation at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The Pope was there. The crown was waiting. Tradition said a king would now bow before God. But at that very moment, Napoleon reached out, took the crown, and placed it on his own head. The cathedral fell silent. No one dared stop him. No one even understood. But he knew exactly what he was doing. It was not arrogance. It was a declaration, a calculated move. I am not the product of divine grace. I am the product of capability, and I will not bow to be legitimized. From that moment on, he was no longer a man who rose through chaos. He became the center of a new order, one where laws came not from birthright, but from results. And the people, those who once threw stones at the old kings, now rose to cheer a new emperor. Because the truth is, people do not hate power, they hate incompetent power. Napoleon made them feel safe, a kind of safety born from competence. No more clueless monarchs, no more hollow rituals. Only one man who knew every brick in the structure of power because he had placed each brick himself. Even in law, he left a mark. The Napoleonic Code. A legal system that was modern, precise, and clear still forms the basis of many legal systems around the world today. Not because he loved justice, but because he knew the fastest way to stabilize an empire without royal blood is the law. Like a software architect writing the operating system for an empire, he embedded his name into every clause, every punctuation mark. But beneath all that power architecture was still a man who had once been a Corsican child staring at Paris with unfamiliar eyes. They say before the coronation, he wrote a short letter to his mother, a woman who had never stepped foot in a palace, never been called queen. The letter contained just 2 words, "I have won." No explanation, no flourishes, no mention of any battle. Because the most important battle in Napoleon's life was not at Austerlitz or Jena or in the Italian campaign. It was the silent battle within the soul of a child who had once been dismissed, unchosen, underestimated. And now, standing at the highest point in France, he did not shout. He simply wrote, "I have won, but..." Won for what? That was the quiet question behind his eyes, a question never fully answered. And from that moment on, Napoleon entered the most dangerous phase for anyone who has ever conquered, when there is nothing left to prove. Is there anything left to stop you? Becoming an emperor is one thing, but turning yourself into a god, that is something else entirely. And Napoleon, like all who have stepped too close to the light, began to believe that the light was coming from within him. From being a strategist, a symbol of ability overcoming fate, he started crafting a myth not just for others to believe, but to silence any lingering doubts within himself. The French did not need a god. They needed a man who knew what they wanted before they could say it. And Napoleon, through some strange intuition, always guessed right. The problem is, after guessing right too many times, you begin to think you are destiny. He appeared on coins like Caesar. He built triumphal arches in Paris to write his name in stone. He ordered painters to show him not on horseback, but flying like a Roman deity. From a warrior, he became a self-made legend, faster than history itself could keep up. People said he was wise, but deep down he had started to believe his own story. No longer Napoleon, the undefeated general, but Napoleon, the one who could not be wrong. And when a man starts to believe he cannot be wrong, the first mistake becomes inevitable. He threw lavish festivals modeled after ancient Rome. In his letters, he began referring to himself in the third person. Statues of him rose in every city's streets were renamed. Every new victory was like a gospel read aloud by thousands of soldiers who no longer believed they followed a man, but a messenger of history. Here is a detail most people miss. Napoleon had a custom-made set of mythical armor, emerald green, with a gold-plated helmet, and a purple cloak embroidered with silver thread. It served no purpose in battle, but it served a purpose in legend. Every time he appeared in that armor, his troops did not see a man. They saw a symbol beyond reach. And when soldiers see you as divine, you no longer need to command you, only need to appear. He understood that, and he became addicted to it. Perhaps that is why he could not stop even after having it all. Unlike others, Napoleon did not want to settle. He wanted to keep going. Always keep going. Europe was not enough. He wanted Russia. History was not enough. He wanted the future. And to go that far, he needed to challenge the one thing no man dares touch: time. He wanted to bend it. Not just live in his era, but stretch into all the ones to come. To make every future generation study him. And for that, he could not die like an ordinary man. He had to remain a phenomenon. But to become a legend, you must not stumble. You must not fade. You must not err. Yet no matter how great a man is still flesh, and flesh has breaking points. The Russian campaign was one of those points. Where he believed he was writing the next chapter of legend turned out to be the place where history began rewriting him. He marched into winter like a god who needed no food, no sleep, no concern for snow or wind. But soldiers did. Horses died. Ammunition froze. The cold did not care about strategy. Napoleon once said, "I understand the weather." But he forgot the weather does not understand him. And it does not have to. The defeat was not just about numbers. It was about fractured belief. When the troops began to feel him, cold. Not because of the wind, but because his gaze grew distant, no longer connected to them. Napoleon was no longer the commander. He was a myth crossing the snow alone. And the tragic part, he still won a few battles after that. But those victories were like the flapping wings of a bird with one broken wing, beautiful but unable to fly. History began to slow down, but his pride did not. They say empires do not collapse from defeat, but from not knowing when to stop. And Napoleon, the man who once calculated every move like artificial intelligence, was now playing his final game. Like a gambler with only one coin of honor left. The scariest thing about power is not losing it. It is when you do not know it is already gone and still believe you hold it. One of his bodyguards once wrote in a journal, "That day I stood next to him, and it felt like standing beside a statue." Napoleon no longer spoke much, no longer drew maps with 2 fingers. He only looked distantly as if trying to continue the legend, but could not find paper. And perhaps in that moment he knew it was not the enemies out there who had defeated him. It was himself, the man who once knew he was mortal, but had come to believe he was a god. Every empire has its staircase, the steps the founder climbs, each victory a new rung. But some staircases do not lead to the heavens. They lead to the abyss. And Napoleon, the man who once ascended faster than anyone in history, began to misstep on broken stairs. Not because he suddenly grew weaker, not because his enemies became stronger, but because when you go too far in your quest to be remembered, you often forget why you started. After the Russian campaign, he still had power, but it was no longer fire. It was the remaining sparks, enough to light a mirror, not enough to bring warmth. And in that mirror, he began to see someone else. Gone was the sharp gaze of the young general. Gone was the cold smile of a man who knew he was right. What remained was weariness, regret, blurred like ash after a great blaze. He returned from Russia with a new title, the defeated emperor. The people of Paris did not riot. They simply went silent. And sometimes silence cuts deeper. In those days, Napoleon still spoke of strategy of recovery of the future. But what no one dared say aloud was this: even he no longer fully believed in himself. The feeling of being infallible had shattered, and from then on, every decision carried a shadow of doubt, like a musician replaying the song that once made him famous, but unsure if the audience still wants to hear it. He built a new army, younger, unfamiliar. But it was no longer Napoleon's army, it was the army of a memory. These new soldiers did not look at him as a legend. They saw only a man, trying to hold on to the image he once was. Then came the Battle of Leipzig. They called it the Battle of the Nations. 600,000 troops from across Europe converged on one battlefield as if an entire continent had convened to stop a single man. Napoleon fought like it was still 1805, but his enemies had learned all he had taught them through defeat. He maneuvered. He laid traps. He coordinated. But this time, everything felt one beat too slow, like a dancer who remembers the steps but whose legs no longer match the rhythm. He lost, not from lack of genius, but because history had turned its face away. And then, he was forced to do the unthinkable, abdicate the throne. One day in April 1814, he sat alone at Fontainebleau. Outside, his old generals whispered about terms of surrender. Inside, he wrote. No manifesto, no justification, just lines to himself about dreams dissolved, about broken trust, and about a question that refused to go away. How did it all lead here? They say. Before leaving the palace, he passed a mirror and stopped. The last time he looked into it as emperor. The last time he saw himself at the summit. After that came Elba, a small, lovely, suffocating island. A prison wrapped in silk, but a prison nonetheless. Napoleon lived like an honorary mayor, oversaw projects, met with locals, pretended to be content. But no one fooled him, not even himself. To Napoleon, Elba was not punishment. It was absence. And for someone who had once appeared on every map, every battlefield, every page of history, absence was the slowest form of death. He wrote letters, read the news, smiled. But deep inside, he was running one last calculation. Was there one move left, one final reversal? And as if history refused to shut the book, an opportunity arose. Louis XVIII, the restored monarch after Napoleon's fall, had failed to win the people. The army still had many who remembered. That man. People whispered. At least when Napoleon ruled, France was not humiliated. And so he returned. Not with an army, not through violence, but through presence. He landed on the coast. A group of soldiers was sent to arrest him. They raised their rifles. He did not draw his sword. He simply walked forward, opened his coat, and said, "If you want to kill your emperor, then shoot." No one fired. They shouted, "Vive l'empereur!" And from that moment on, history was dragged forward one more chapter. But what is written in addition often should not have been. Because can a man who was once a symbol, when he returns, become a symbol again? Or is he only the shadow of who he once was? Napoleon returned to Paris like a storm, but one without thunder. Just quiet wind. There was no uprising, no bloodshed. Only a small man wearing his familiar tricorn hat riding through village after village, town after town, and in every place he passed, soldiers switched sides like dominoes, falling in the memory of his name. He did not fight, but he won. And France, like an old lover, turned back one more time, not out of reason, but out of longing. Thus began the 100 Days. The final 100 days, where Napoleon was no longer the legend rising, but the legend trying to resist himself. He returned to everything strategy maps conscription. But this time, everything felt heavier. The look in his eyes was no longer fire, but stone. Silent, steady, and sad. Napoleon knew the world had changed. His old generals had splintered. His former allies were now suspicious. The powers of Europe were not coming to stop him. They were coming to end him. And so he staked everything on a single battle, Waterloo. Many say it was a mistake. But for Napoleon, perhaps it was the only exit left. Not to win, but to choose the place of ending. No hiding, no quiet death, but facing history, one last time with the same gaze that once made all of Europe redraw its borders. Waterloo was not just a defeat. It was the final symphony of a genius performed in a concert hall that no longer listened. He misjudged the weather. The roads were wet. The cannons did not fire in time. Reinforcements arrived too late. And most of all, he misjudged men commanders who once would have followed, now hesitated, because they too understood his time had passed. When it all collapsed, he did not scream. He did not cry. He did not beg. He simply gave the order to retreat. And that was the curtain's close. This time there was no Elba. This time it was St. Helena, a remote island in the Atlantic Ocean, far from every map of power, where he was no longer an emperor, no longer a strategist, no longer anything at all. Just a man sitting and watching the waves crash against the rocks day after day and writing. Writing what no one had asked. Writing for the future. Writing for himself. Some say he was still scheming, that he pretended to be weak, waiting for one last return. But the truth may be simpler. He was simply trying to understand why people can love a legend but not live with it forever. He wrote about battles, about France, about betrayal. But buried in those words was something else in completeness, a feeling he had never shown before, that no matter how many victories he earned, how much he built, how much he changed, he was still a man, trying to climb to the sky without wings. And the staircase he built, no matter how solid, could never carry the weight of someone who did not know when to stop. Napoleon did not die in blood, not on horseback, not on the battlefield. He died in bed, in a small room without glory or grandeur, just a table, a few books, and one loyal servant. And yet, strangely, he did not vanish. Centuries later, people still argue about him, still make films, still write books, still ask questions. Because he was not just a figure. He was an idea, a question mark, a story without an ending. In history, very few men have defeats that echo, like victories, and Napoleon was one of them, because he did not just want to live in his own time. He wanted to live in the minds of every generation after. And perhaps he did. Not by height, not by bloodline, not by perfection, but by the sheer force of magnificent imperfection. A short man, a child from outside the royal circle, a figure mocked for his hat, his posture, his voice. But when he stood over the map of the world, he saw something no one else could. That power does not lie in a crown, but in the ability to make people believe in your dream, even when that dream is impossible. And now, when you look back at history, you may see something quietly haunting. No matter how low you stand, if you can see far enough, eventually the world may bow to your gaze. One morning in the year 1791, church bells echoed through the square in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. The spring breeze swept across the young grass, carrying the scent of fresh pies and ink from the nearby print shop. Everything was calm, until a child screamed. Mom. The church window is broken. It was the third time that month. The culprit was not a thief. It was not a tornado. It was a round ball, the weapon of choice in a game called baseball. And so history made a ruling. No playing baseball within 250 feet of the church. That was the earliest surviving record of a sport once seen as a public nuisance. A game that made pastors groan, villagers furious, and eventually made America fall in love. Sounds strange. Good. Because that is how all legends begin. No one knows exactly who first swung a bat, but throughout the 18th century, in small towns from Pennsylvania to New York, kids, and sometimes adults, began hitting balls and running between makeshift bases made of stones, logs, or whatever could be stepped on without falling. They called it rounders, town, ball, baseball, or simply the game. There were no rules, no uniforms, no roaring crowds, only laughter, sweat, and something quietly growing, something that one day an entire nation would call its identity. But back then, baseball was still just a commoner's pastime, even considered a nuisance. Congressmen were too busy debating the Constitution. Plantation owners were hiding their gold. And in towns like Pittsfield, people banned baseball near churches as if it were a sin. Why? Because it made young men skip church. Because it shattered windows. Because it did not resemble the noble pursuits of music books or prayer. But there was something the ministers did not understand. Within that game, Americans were learning how to stand tall, run forward, and never get out just because someone told them to. By the early 19th century, baseball had crept into every corner of New York. The noisy harbors, the crowded boarding houses of Irish and Italian immigrants. It was no longer just a game. It became the one place where people felt they counted even when no one else did. In public parks, they played until sunset and kept playing under gas lamps. Not for money, not for glory, but because it was the only moment in the day when they got to be winners. One good hit, one dash for home, one hug from a teammate. But then by the 1840s, baseball began to change. It got serious. A group of necktied gentlemen in Manhattan formed the Knickerbocker Baseball Club. They wrote rules. They wore uniforms. They crafted proper bats. And of course, they no longer welcomed the rowdy, filthy immigrant crowds. Baseball began to be tamed into a gentleman's sport. A pastime for the well-bred, white-educated landowning men. A shiny toy to prove that America, too, had class like the British. From a rebellious game once banned, baseball was now praised by newspapers as the sport of the frontier spirit, conveniently ignoring the fact that it was born on poor streets in the hands of people who never made it into the history books. But baseball, like America, never stayed in the box that any one class tried to build. It kept transforming. On southern fields, where slaves were allowed to play when the masters were feeling generous. In black alleys of Chicago, where children drew bases with stolen white chalk from schoolyards, it entered hearts. And slowly it became an unspoken promise that on the baseball field, everyone could start at first base, and if they tried hard enough, they might just make it home. On an April day in 1869 in Cincinnati, the first professional baseball team was born, the Red Stockings. They played for money. They had schedules. They sold tickets. They ran ads. And in that moment, baseball officially became a national ritual. No one dared to ban it anymore. No one called it child's play anymore. Because now, from the president to the lamplighter, everyone had a team to root for, a diamond to dream about, and a home run to hope for. But do not be fooled. Baseball is not just a sport. It is a record of history not written in ink, but in dust, sweat, and the cry of safe rising from between four diamond-shaped bases. And to understand how a once-banned game became the heartbeat of a nation, we need to look deeper into the historic tricks, the color-breaking swings, and the souls redeemed on green fields. The game is only just beginning. In the year 1905, a 14-year-old boy named Byron Bancroft Ban Johnson sat cross-legged beneath the worn wooden bleachers of a baseball field in Cooperstown, New York, his eyes burning with excitement. He listened as an old man said, "Did you know baseball was invented right here? By a military general. His name was Abner Doubleday." The kids gasped. The wind rustled through the field, and in a place filled with nothing but dust, a legend was planted with one sweet little lie. That lie would survive for over 100 years. It would last so long that the entire United States would come to believe it was true. According to the legend, Abner Doubleday was a Civil War hero who drew the very first blueprint of baseball in 1839 right there in Cooperstown. A general, a patriot, and now, the father of America's greatest sport. There was just one problem. Abner Doubleday never once mentioned baseball. There is no evidence he ever played it. And he was not even in Cooperstown in 1839. In fact, he kept a daily journal detailed like a historian, and not one single line ever mentioned inventing any game called baseball. So why did a lie so innocent become accepted like gospel across the nation? The answer lies in pride and fear. At the dawn of the 20th century, America was rising as a global superpower. But its cultural heart still trembled with insecurity. Music, literature, even sports all seemed to come from Europe. Americans needed something purely American, something they could claim as their own. And in that moment, baseball was chosen as the perfect candidate. But to transform a street game into a national symbol, they needed a founder, a hero who looked the part, inspired trust, and felt American enough. So they picked Doubleday. Not because of truth, but because he wore a general's cap and carried the solemn beard of a legend. The mastermind behind this magic trick was a businessman named Albert Spaulding, a former player, a sports equipment mogul, and a man who understood that sometimes history does not have to be accurate, just memorable. Spaulding created a commission to investigate the origins of baseball but in truth it was a public relations campaign in disguise. They chased after vague letters the tale of a forgetful old man and used it all to build a glorious birth for baseball, right in America's hometown. The result, Doubleday made it into the textbooks. Cooperstown became baseball's holy ground. And Spalding, he sold millions of baseball bats named after the newly minted legend. A perfect home run swung with words instead of wood. Back then, Americans never questioned it. Because they wanted to believe. They wanted a game of their own, a history of their own, a hero born from American soil, not borrowed from Europe. Baseball became the soul of the nation, a miracle made in America. And even as historians whispered the truth among themselves, the stadiums stayed full. Fathers told the tale to their sons like a Greek myth. They were not searching for facts, they were searching for belief. But somewhere in dimly lit archives, a few started digging through old records. Paintings from the 18th century showed English villagers playing a game called baseball. Legal documents from Germany described similar games under different names. Then came historians like Henry Chadwick, labeled a traitor who said baseball was not invented. It evolved. It has no single father, only countless hands. Chadwick was shunned. He was left out of events, but he never stayed silent. Because he understood history is not meant to make us proud. It is meant to show us who we are, the good and the bad. Today, the Baseball Hall of Fame still stands in Cooperstown. The statue of Doubleday still points toward the field. Tour groups still flock there to see the place where it all began. And no one dares to ask out loud, was this all a lie? Because maybe. Some lies are too beautiful to break. Like fairy tales, people hold on to them, not because they believe them, but because they do not want to lose the feelings that come with them. At its core, baseball never needed a founder. It was born from muddy feet of children, from the sweat of immigrant laborers, from desperate sprints to home plate, even after being called out 3 times. It did not begin in Cooperstown. It began in places no one remembers. And perhaps that is the real magic. That a game does not need a legend to be great. It only needs players, it needs believers, and it needs someone to tell the story. On a sweltering summer day in 1930, at a rundown stadium in the middle of Chicago, the crowd was packed shoulder to shoulder. No seats. No electronic scoreboard, no reporters from the New York Times, just the murmurs of the people. And one large man stepping onto the field, bat in hand, eyes sharp as bullets. That was Josh Gibson, the Black Babe Ruth. He swung the bat, and the ball soared so far no one could measure it. A home run no one fully saw, because the stadium was too poor to own a camera. But people remembered, and they whispered, if Josh Gibson were white, he would already be a monument. That was the strangest era in baseball, the golden age of the forgotten. When Major League Baseball refused to admit black players, the true stars, true geniuses, were pushed into a parallel world, the Negro Leagues. They were not allowed into Yankee Stadium. They had no million-dollar contracts. But they had crowds. They had pride. They had fire in their veins. In that world, people did not just play baseball. They proved they existed. The Negro Leagues were not just a league. They were an act of resistance, a self-contained universe inside a divided America. Here, Satchel Paige pitched with such precision that Once he told his entire team to leave the field, declaring he would beat the other team alone. And he did. Cool Papa Bell was so fast, it was said he could turn off the light and be in bed before the room got dark. That was not bragging. That was poetry in the trenches. Because those men did not play to be remembered. They played so they would not be forgotten. Meanwhile, in the official world, white baseball still praised sportsmanship, nobility, and the gentleman's game. But across the fence, where black stadiums had no microphones, baseball became a quiet counterpunch to history. They traveled by overnight trains, ate cold sandwiches at bus stations. No hotel would accept black players. They slept on buses, brushed their teeth with cold water, and stepped onto the field with swings as sharp as blades. In 1934, the Negro League All-Stars played an unofficial exhibition game against a group of white superstars. The result, the Negro team won. Easily. The white crowd fell silent. Team owners grew uneasy. And history. It turned its back again. No major newspaper printed that victory. No invitation came from Major League Baseball, because admitting they were better would mean admitting that racism was wrong, and America back then was not ready to be honest with itself. But baseball has a strange power. It does not keep secrets for long. A home run might be forgotten, but the sound of a ball striking the bat lingers for a very long time in people's hearts. That injustice began to pile up, like baseballs trapped in a net waiting to burst free. And then, a name stepped out of the shadows, Jackie Robinson. But before we tell Jackie's story, this must be said. The Negro Leagues were not a sideshow. They were a culture, a community, a world where the rejected found their worth. There, baseball was not just a game. It was a way for a black man to say, I am good. I deserve this. I do not need your permission to shine. Later, when Major League Baseball finally opened its doors to black players, they did not invite Satchel Paige at his peak, or Josh Gibson while he was still alive. They chose Jackie, a younger man, more emotionally controlled. And slowly, the lights faded on the Negro Leagues. The talent moved to a bigger stage. But when people tell the story of baseball's history, those names, those torches burning in the night, are often left out of the footnotes, as if they were just shadows, as if they were only paving the way. No. They were hidden legends. More than 60 years later, in the year 2006, Major League Baseball finally recognized several Negro League players in the Hall of Fame. Statues were built. Medals were awarded. But most of those honored were already gone. Too late. But at least an apology was made. Today, American baseball is looking back on itself. Negro League games are being replayed. Their stories are being retold. Names once buried in the dust, now etched in stone. And most importantly, a black child can step onto a field today, lift their head high, and know they are following in the footsteps of heroes who were never seen on television, but always lived in the heartbeat of the game. The Negro Leagues are not just a chapter of history. They are a mirror held up to America where light and shadow live side by side. And every time a ball is thrown, we can hear the whisper, I was not allowed to play on your field. But I played anyway. And I won. April 1947, at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. It was cold. The wind came howling from the Atlantic, cutting through the rows of old wooden seats. More than 26,000 spectators sat waiting for something that had never happened before. They were not waiting for a home run, not for a spectacular catch, but for a black man to step onto the field wearing the uniform of the Brooklyn Dodgers. His name was Jackie Robinson. And when he walked onto the grass, legs stiff as stone, heart pounding like war drums, he did not just break the color barrier in baseball. He walked straight into a fire waiting to consume him. Jackie Robinson was not the strongest, not the best hitter, not the most famous of the black players of his time. But he had something few dared to carry: the ability to hold back his rage. When Branch Rickey, president of the Dodgers, searched for the first, he was not looking for the most talented man. He was looking for the one who could endure the most. A man who could stay silent when insulted. A man who could be hit in the head with a pitch and not retaliate. A man who would not just represent himself, but an entire people compressed under the weight of centuries. When Jackie signed with the Dodgers, he knew exactly what was coming. He would be insulted, threatened with death, shunned by teammates, spit on by fans, and he had to swallow all of it without reacting. Not because he was weak, but because that was the price of admission. In those early months, Jackie lived through hell. Opposing teams refused to play if he was on the field. Some teammates suggested a boycott. Someone once threw razor blades into his locker. A few fans mailed threats to murder his wife and children. When he stood on the field, he was not just facing the pitcher, he was facing hundreds of years of racism. Every base Jackie ran was a stomp on bigotry. Every time he connected the bat to the ball, it was a voice shouting into silence. But Jackie did not fall. He did more than stand. He played like a superstar. In his very first season, he batted .97, scored 125 runs, and won the title of Rookie of the Year. Not because of sympathy, not because he was a symbol. He won on merit. And then the crowds began to cheer. Teammates began to reach out. The press began to write his name with respect, not just curiosity. But behind the spotlight, Jackie was a man drained. He was not allowed to react, not allowed to be angry, not allowed to make noise. He had to be perfect, because with just one mistake, people would say, "See, they don't belong here." His wife Rachel once said, Jackie didn't sleep well for years. He wasn't fighting one battle. He was fighting every single day. Jackie Robinson did not break open a door. He charged through it knowing he might never make it out. He was the first to take the blows so others could one day just play as human beings. After him, a wave of black talent entered Major League Baseball. Larry Doby, Roy Campanella, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron. But Jackie, always the first, was the one who stepped into the fire so that fire would not consume the next generation. After retirement, Jackie kept fighting. He wrote books, gave speeches, and worked with civil rights organizations. He once wrote a letter to President Eisenhower demanding action, not just words. He supported Martin Luther King, but also spoke out when he saw the movement lose direction. Jackie was never just an athlete. He was a soldier who never left the battlefield even when the ballpark was gone. In 1962, he became the first black man inducted into the Hall of Fame. In 1972, the Dodgers retired his number 42. And in 1997, 50 years after his first run, Major League Baseball retired number 42 across the entire league. No one would wear that number again. No one deserved to. Jackie Robinson passed away in 1972 at the age of 53. Too young, too soon. But perhaps just enough time to see how he had helped change an entire country. Each year on Jackie Robinson Day, every player in Major League Baseball, from rookies to legends, steps onto the field wearing number 42. No names, no nicknames, just one number, one reminder that there was a man who dared to walk into the fire, who dared to play in silence, who dared to endure for all of us. December 1941. America woke up under the smoke of Pearl Harbor. Air raid sirens screamed across cities. Children stopped playing. Adults stopped talking. And in that moment, a nation stepped into war. And through the gunfire, the bombs, the blood, and the tears, one thing was not dropped: a baseball. It rolled across battlefields. It flew over the decks of warships, and it echoed through army camps like the voice of home. When the United States entered World War II, nearly the entire country was mobilized. Factories turned into weapons plants. Bakeries became ration suppliers. And baseball fields became recruiting stations. They called it the greatest exodus in the history of sports. Over 500 Major League players put down their gloves and picked up rifles. Among them were legends Joe DiMaggio, Yogi Berra, Bob Feller, Hank Greenberg, and most notably, Ted Williams, the greatest hitter in Red Sox history, who gave up all privileges to become a fighter pilot. He did not go to war for photo ops. He actually shot down enemy planes. There were games postponed because players were called to duty. Entire Major League seasons were threatened by manpower shortages. But instead of collapsing, baseball became the spiritual lifeblood of the nation. President Franklin D. Roosevelt wrote a now famous letter to the president of Major League Baseball, urgently requesting keep playing ball. The people need something to believe in, something to hope for. And so while American soldiers fought on the beaches of Normandy, their families back home filled the stands. They sat in the bleachers' eyes following the arc of a ball, imagining their husbands, their sons, still whole, somewhere across 1,000,000 miles of war. Baseball was no longer just a game. It was a promise that we would survive this. On the front lines, soldiers built makeshift fields on the grass of army camps. They used borrowed gloves, torn up balls, and bats carved from trees. Some impromptu games were held right after combat smoke still rising, the smell of gunpowder in the air. But in the dirt and the danger, a clean pitch, a perfect swing, it could make an entire platoon burst into laughter. Laughter in the middle of hell. A sound from a peaceful world. Some soldiers carried baseball gloves in their backpacks into battle. Some died with the glove still in hand. Some survived bringing it home like a lucky charm. A token of the belief that if we are still playing, we are still alive. Even inside the internment camps for Japanese Americans, where more than 100,000 people were imprisoned behind barbed wire out of suspicion, baseball was played. They built diamonds on hard dirt, sewed up torn gloves, formed teams, kept score, not to escape, but to remind themselves even in captivity, we are still human. After the war, when the players returned, baseball did not just welcome them home as heroes. It got new blood. Fans did not just cheer for home runs. They cheered because he shot down Japanese planes, or he just came back from Saipan, or simply he survived. But war left its scars. Ted Williams came back and had to relearn how to swing after injury. Bob Feller lost hearing in one ear. Many never played again. Not because of their bodies, but because of the memories. Baseball for them was no longer just joy. It became a doorway to the faces that never came back. Even so, baseball remained. It carried America through the war. And when stadium seats began to fill again, something in the country had changed. It was no longer just a gentleman's pastime, no longer just a Sunday fun. It was living proof that America had been shaken, but had not fallen. Later, during national holidays, Armed Forces Day became tradition at the ballpark. Veterans sat in honored seats. The flag waved. The anthem rang out. And in that moment, there were no parties, no politics, no races. Just a ball rolling between those who made it home. Baseball did not win the war. It did not stop bullets. But in the darkest moments, it gave us a reason to keep going. A game that seemed small, but was big enough to keep a nation from falling into despair. September 8, 1998. Bush Memorial Stadium, St. Louis. More than 43,000 fans stood up holding their breath. All of America held its breath. National television paused its programming to broadcast the moment live. Mark McGwire stepped up to the plate. The stadium lights gleamed against his stone-carved shoulders. His bat looked like a warrior's sword. And then, that swing echoed into the deepest corners of America's memory. The ball soared out of the park. McGwire touched home plate. 62 in one season. One man. A new record. The crowd roared. Teammates hugged him tight. The son of Roger Maris, the man whose record was just broken, came out to offer an embrace. The media called it the resurrection of baseball. America, weary from war, moral fatigue, and political scandal, once again believed in miracles. Until they found out what was behind those enormous arms, a syringe. The steroid era did not begin with an injection. It began with hunger. After the infamous 1994 strike, baseball was in ruins. The season was canceled. Fans walked away. Ticket sales plummeted. TV networks cut broadcasts. Team owners, media executives, even the MLB itself all panicked. And then they found a way out power. Home runs. The impossible swing. Every time the ball flew out of the park, revenue rose. The crowds came back. But no one asked, how did those bodies suddenly get so massive? Amid the frenzy, Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa became gods of a new age. Two men, one white, one black, raced in a silent war. Who would break Roger Maris's record first? Every game became a chapter in an epic. Every swing a national anthem. And every bottle of pills a secret buried behind locked drawers. The press praised. MLB stayed quiet. Team owners smiled satisfied. And through that frenzy, another name quietly emerged, Barry Bonds. He did not need the race. He did not need the love. He wanted one thing, absolute dominance. And he got it. In 2001, Bonds hit 73 home runs in a single season. The whole country stood up not to cheer, but to ask, Is this even human anymore? Bond's body changed each year. His shoulders widened, his face swelled, his voice deepened. But like McGuire, like Sosa, he denied everything. Just training, they said. Good genes, they smiled. There's no proof, they challenged. Until the proof arrived. In 2005, the United States Congress held hearings. A trial without guns or prisons, but capable of destroying a sport. Mark McGuire sat there, sweat pouring down his face. "Did you use steroids?" a senator asked. He lowered his head. "I'm not here to talk about the past." Sammy Sosa claimed he did not understand English. Rafael Palmeiro, who just 1 month earlier had pointed his finger and sworn innocence, tested positive. Baseball, once the symbol of American purity and values, now stood exposed. The steroid era was not just a phase. It was a moral fracture at the heart of a culture. Because everyone knew, everyone suspected. But no one spoke up as long as tickets sold, commercials aired, and legends were built like statues. We wanted to be deceived. Fans were angry, but not just because they felt betrayed. They were angry because they realized they too had been part of the lie. They cheered when the ball flew. They bought the jerseys. They shared the highlights. And deep down, they knew no one hits 73 home runs in one season, on chicken and bench presses alone. Major League Baseball responded slowly. Bans on performance-enhancing drugs were passed, but too late. The result, McGuire, Sosa, Bonds, none were inducted into the Hall of Fame. Statues crumbled, but the real statues had never been built. Now, whenever a player breaks a record, people whisper, "Is it clean? Did they test? Is it real?" Doubt became a habit. Baseball, once a miracle, now goes through an ethical scanner. But in recent years, people have started to look back. They do not forgive, but they understand. They understand that those plastic gods were also human. They were drained by the system, crushed by expectations. And when faced with the choice, rise or be forgotten, they chose to rise. At any cost. The steroid era was a cannonball to the surface of baseball. It revealed cracks that had always been there. But if baseball survived war, racism, and lies, it can survive steroids too. Because in the end, baseball is not just about home runs. It is about getting back up after the fall and playing again. In the center of Yankee Stadium on an autumn night, the crowd stood in silence. The game was over. The lights were still on. No one left. On the giant screen was the image of a gray-haired man wearing number 2, his hand over his heart. It was Derek Jeter, the final captain of the Yankees' legendary era. There were no more bats cracking. No more cries of strike from the umpire. Only one quiet question passed through the eyes of thousands. Is this still the baseball we once knew? For over 150 years, baseball has never been just a game. It has been America's stage. A place where dreams ran the bases. A place where nightmares were thrown straight into your face, and sometimes nobody caught them. In every chapter of the country's history, baseball has carried both scars and light. When America segregated, baseball segregated. When America went to war, baseball went to battle. When America became obsessed with power, baseball injected it into its arms. And when America needed hope, baseball once again became the symbol to hold on to. In the 21st century, the United States changed faster than ever. Technology, politics, culture, everything sped forward like a bullet train. But baseball, it stayed the same. The game still stretched for hours. No countdown clock, no blaring effects, no need for social media. It is a game built on patience, on strategy, on slow, quiet emotion. And that has made it a stranger in this new world. Young fans began to drift away. TikTok could not carry a highlight longer than 20 seconds. Boring, they said. Slow, they complained. Not as exciting as the NBA or the NFL. And so, baseball began to change. The pitch clock was introduced. Rules were adjusted to shorten the game. Fewer commercial breaks, bigger prizes, more fantasy leagues. An attempt to make a 150-year-old elder feel young again. But there is one thing baseball has never done, and maybe never will: change its heart. There is still that pause between each pitch, still that glance from the catcher signaling amid tens of thousands, still that sound of bat meeting ball like classical music in a storm of modern noise. Baseball does not need speed. It needs watchers who are willing to slow down. And because of that, it still survives. Because in a spinning America, there are people who want to sit still for 3 hours just to see someone make it home. Because there are fathers still bringing their kids to the ballpark just like their own fathers did. Because there are old men who still tell stories of Jackie, of Lou Gehrig, of Mantle, as if they played just yesterday. Because there are children in small Midwestern towns still sneaking behind their houses to swing bats in the twilight, dreaming of one day walking through a worn wooden gate and into something called the major leagues. And so we ask ourselves, what is baseball a sport, a religion, a shared memory, or a mirror? In that mirror, we see an America full of contradictions, a nation that is great but not flawless, a people who love freedom but once practiced segregation, a society that honors heroes but sometimes discards the very ones who bring it glory. Baseball does not hide this. It records it all. Every swing, every fall, every forgiveness. Each time Americans walk into a stadium, they are not just watching a game. They are stepping into a reflection of their own country. 4 bases, like the 4 seasons of life. The pitcher, the wielder of fate. The batter, the rebel, the dreamer, the gambler. One game, like one life. No countdown, no time limits. Only chances and swings. And like America, baseball never ends because it lost. It ends when the last person puts down the bat. Today in Cooperstown, the Baseball Hall of Fame remains open. The statue of Abner Doubleday still stands, even though everyone now knows he did not invent the game. But perhaps that does not matter anymore, because baseball, like America, does not need a founder. It needs people who keep playing. And when the sun sets on the stadium, when the lights go out, when the crowd goes home and the night wind drifts across empty seats, the ball still lies on the field. The bat still leans against the fence. And one question never fully answered still hangs in the air. Is this just a game, or is it the soul of a nation still trying to understand itself? Baseball has never been only about winning. It is about how we endure defeat, how we return to the field after each strikeout, how we run all 4 bases and still call it coming home. And if America is a dream, then baseball is how we learn to dream it. Not perfect, not clean, not easy, but always, always worth playing.